The air in the marble-clad Supreme Court chamber was so still you could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system and the soft rustle of papers as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat. All eyes turned toward her, not because she was a congresswoman, not because she was a skilled orator, but because the moment she had assembled had been building for weeks. A case that would test the boundaries of executive overreach, civil liberties, and federal authority. And at the heart of it was a piece of classified information she had courageously leaked, something too explosive to ignore, something that could redefine the way the nation saw itself. The moment she opened her mouth, Chief Justice John Roberts leaned forward, his brow furrowed, as though he sensed the storm that was about to break across his immaculate bench. Could a lone congresswoman truly upend the highest court in the land with a single revelation? The whispers that followed her first sentence were electric, a low rumble that spread like wildfire. She's about to drop it. The shock on Roberts's face was immediate and unmistakable. Unblinking eyes, a mouth that twitched as if words caught in his throat. The rest of the room held its collective breath, ready for the moment that would forever change everything. Jasmine's heels clicked against the polished floor as she took each deliberate step toward the lectern. The smell of old wood and leather-bound volumes surrounded her, a reminder that she walked on hallowed ground. Yet her mind was far from history. It was focused on the present, on the crackling tension in the room, on Roberts, on the faint tremor she sensed in her own voice. She inhaled slowly, tasting the metallic hint of adrenaline that always accompanied her most daring moves. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a challenge to every institution that believed it could silence her or people like her. She cleared her throat and began. Your Honors, in March of last year, the White House authorized a covert surveillance program targeting domestic activists under the guise of national security, without congressional approval, without judicial oversight, and without the knowledge of the American people. Her words landed like a thunderclap. Cameras hidden behind wood panels snapped to life, and reporters scribbled furiously in the press gallery above. Roberts's posture shifted, one eyebrow arched, his fingers tightening around the edge of the bench. The other justices exchanged swift glances. Jasmine pressed on, voice steady, eyes locked on Roberts, as if daring him to interrupt her. 20 seconds later, she revealed the proof, a set of encrypted memos she had obtained through a whistleblower, showing emails from senior advisors instructing intelligence agencies to reroute domestic communications through foreign servers to evade legal restrictions. The gasp that swept through the courtroom felt like a current of electricity. Roberts's jaw dropped slightly. For a moment, he looked less like the stoic guardian of the Constitution and more like a man caught off guard by a truth he couldn't unsee. She paused, scanning the faces of every justice. The fanning lights above cast dramatic shadows, accentuating the lines on Roberts's face, the slight tremor at the corner of Associate Justice Samuel Alito's eye, the faint tightening at Sonia Sotomayor's mouth. Everyone recognized that this was no ordinary argument. It was a revelation that could topple administrations. Jasmine's chest tightened, but she let the silence stretch, giving each justice time to absorb the weight of what she had just laid bare. The air was thick with anticipation. Would Roberts cut her off? Would he dismiss her, call her reckless, label her a partisan crusader? Instead, he leaned forward in an uncharacteristic motion and said, voice low, Congresswoman Crockett, are you absolutely certain these documents are authentic? Jasmine's heart pounded, but her response was unwavering. Yes, Your Honor. I have personally verified them with 2 independent experts. I stand by their authenticity. Her calm confidence drove the point home. The camera panned to Roberts's hand, which was now curling tightly around the gavel. The audience could almost hear the gears turning behind his eyes. Political ramifications, questions of separation of powers, the scandal that would erupt if this went public. Yet here he was, a man trained to listen, his skepticism evident but overcome by the undeniable force of her evidence. In that split second, Jasmine had not only seized control of the courtroom, she had seized control of the entire narrative. As she spoke further, laying out the constitutional arguments, Roberts reclined, absorbing every word. The other justices leaned in as well. Jasmine deftly navigated complex legal precedents, from United States versus Nixon to the War Powers Resolution debates, illustrating how the executive branch had overstepped unchecked. She wove in her own observations from years in Congress, late-night sessions in the Cannon House office building, the skepticism she faced from colleagues who believed national security was beyond reproach. She described the nights she lost sleep, poring over declassified archives in case the evidence was already public, searching for a way to tie it all together. Another pause, another beat of silence. Roberts's hand twitched above the gavel, but he did not strike. Instead, he offered a nod, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that he recognized the gravity of what she presented. And then, as if on cue, the public gallery erupted. Phones flashed, reporters leaned forward, assistants jotted notes frantically, and lawyers behind her murmured in disbelief. Jasmine's lips curved into a small, fierce smile. She had done it. She had shocked John Roberts, and by extension, she had shocked the entire nation. The moment hung suspended for a heartbeat longer. Then Roberts said, "We will recess to review this new evidence." With that, the gavel pounded once, a deep echo that reverberated through the chamber, and the courtroom emptied in a swirl of black robes and hushed speculations. Jasmine walked back to her seat, her knees rattling, but her mind sharp. She felt the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes, curiosity, admiration, and the first hints of fear. She had struck a nerve. Outside the chamber, the corridors buzzed with fractious energy. Reporters jockeyed for position, clergy-born marchers gathered on the Capitol steps, and pundits across cable news panels scrambled to unpack what had just transpired. Jasmine paused at the top of the stairs, the stone steps cool beneath her polished black pumps. She closed her eyes for a moment, tasting the mingled scents of polished marble, an aroma she was becoming intimately familiar with, and the faint citrusy perfume of a woman who had just rushed past. She allowed herself one breath, in-out. This was only the beginning. Later that day, as she stepped into a small conference room deep within the Russell Senate office building, the familiar smell of stale coffee and printer toner reminded her of the grind she'd endured to get here. Her staffer, Malik, hovered near a laptop, screen aglow with live tweets and breaking news alerts. Jasmine didn't glance at it. She already knew the headlines. She closed her eyes briefly, the echoes of the courtroom still in her ears, the hush, the gasp, the echoes of history shifting. Now, the stakes were exponentially higher. From this point forward, every word she spoke, every vote she cast, every handshake she exchanged would be colored by what she had unleashed. She sank into a chair at the head of the table, smoothing her blazer as her staff gathered close. Malik looked up, apprehension in his eyes. "Congresswoman, you're already trending worldwide. If the justices decide in our favor, it means impeachment proceedings for half the administration." His voice wavered just a bit. "If they don't," he trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Jasmine leaned back, steepling her fingers. "If they don't, Malik, we go public. Absurd as it sounds, we've already given them proof. If the Supreme Court doesn't act, Congress must. The people need to know." She could almost hear the questions forming. Could she really take on the court and then take on her colleagues in her own party? Did she have the resilience to withstand the blowback? She tapped her pen against her notebook, her mind racing. Every nerve in her body tingled with a combination of dread and exhilaration. The same sensation she felt in aviation hangars watching F-35s roar overhead, imagining her uncle's Navy days. The feeling of being on the cusp of something monumental. One of her junior aides, a bright-eyed recent law graduate named Clarissa, spoke up. "Ma'am, some analysts think the Chief Justice might recuse himself once the political fallout is clear. But that's uncharted territory, never happened in recent history. If he stays, he could craft an opinion that sweeps the case under the rug." She swallowed. "But if he steps aside, someone like Justice Kagan or Justice Jackson could take the lead, and they're both known for their civil liberties stances." Jasmine's eyes flicked to the window, where the late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the Capitol dome. She thought of the next move, the strategy. They had to prepare for both outcomes. If the court ruled in their favor, the focus would shift immediately to Congress. If the court didn't act, the nation would need a leader to channel outrage into action. She would be that leader. "Give me quantitative polling on public trust in the Supreme Court after this hearing," she said, voice firm. "I need to know which demographic groups are with us, who's livid that a court is ignoring clear evidence of executive overreach. I also want a briefing on grassroots civil rights organizations. We need to align with them quickly." Malik nodded, scribbling furiously. The rest of the team moved into action. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the familiar hum of bureaucracy settle around her. Schemes formed in her mind. She'd arrange private meetings with key legislators, line up interviews with vetted journalists, and prepare to host a sit-down on the Capitol lawn, an event billed as a constitutional check for a cause that transcended party lines. She felt a swell of pride. This was the moment she had been building towards since her first term, knocking on doors in Dallas, listening to veterans' stories, teachers' frustrations, single mothers' fears. She had vowed never to shy away from a fight that mattered. Now, here she was, targeting the very core of separation of powers. Could she really outsmart the political establishment? As her mind sharpened on that question, she felt that familiar spark, the thrill of the chase. The days that followed were a blur of late-night strategy sessions, off-the-record meetings with civil rights leaders, and rapid-fire emails. For every ally they rallied, they uncovered another opponent. White House spokespeople calling her a sensationalist, conservative-leaning pundits questioning her motives, and even some in her own party urging caution. The political press whispered rumors that she was grandstanding, that her leak was irresponsible, that she was trying to ignite a constitutional crisis for personal gain. But the volume of the national conversation grew louder with each passing hour, propelled by Jasmine's unflinching resolve. Midway through that tumultuous week came the first seismic shift. A leaked internal memo from the White House counsel's office, obtained by an anonymous source, advised the administration to coax Roberts into summarily denying her petition on procedural grounds, to avoid the risky public spectacle of overturning Nixon-era precedents. The memo, published on a Tuesday evening, ignited a firestorm. Overnight, the narrative transformed from Congresswoman versus court to court versus court. Could Roberts maintain his image as an apolitical arbiter if he simply dismissed her evidence? What would history say about the man who let shadowy operations flourish unchecked? The next morning, Jasmine sat down in her car outside a local community center in Arlington, Texas, preparing for a roundtable with grassroots activists. She reviewed Malik's briefing one last time. Statistics on public trust in government, demographic breakdowns of civil liberties concerns, fundraising projections, and a draft of her opening statement. Her phone buzzed. An encrypted text from Clarissa with a single line. Roberts circulated a draft opinion that references Marbury versus Madison. "This is big." Jasmine tapped the message twice, then turned the engine off and closed her eyes. The sun had just pierced the horizon, sending a glow of pink and orange across the suburban landscape. Minutes later, she emerged from the car in tailored navy slacks and a crisp white blouse, determined. She was met by a dozen community leaders, each representing different neighborhoods and causes. A pastor who fought affordable housing issues, a nonprofit director advocating for immigrant rights, a former schoolteacher campaigning for student loan reform. Her presence united them. They all whispered gratitude, admiration, relief that someone in Washington was finally taking their concerns personally. When Jasmine began to speak, her voice was measured yet impassioned. She described how the unchecked surveillance program endangered every community they represented. She was relentless, weaving local anecdotes, like the contractor whose emails were intercepted because he attended a peaceful protest, into the larger narrative of constitutional decay. The room grew tense as she outlined the stakes. An America where private conversations could be monitored, where fear dictated dissent, where public servants felt their power was absolute. She asked the crowd to envision life without the safeguard of judicial oversight. Would parents feel safe teaching their kids about history? Would journalists fear reporting on government abuses? Would faith leaders hesitate before preaching about justice? Her rhetorical questions punctuated the air, stirring the crowd's emotions. As the discussion continued, a young activist named Kareem challenged her. "Ma'am, if the Supreme Court chooses to ignore your evidence, how can we trust any institution? How do we fight back when the very people who should protect us turn a blind eye?" Jasmine's gaze softened. She leaned forward, hands clasped. "That's a fair question, Kareem. The answer is that we build alternative avenues of accountability. When courts fail, we appeal to the people, to the ballot, to the very principles this country was founded on. We remind them that democracy is more than buildings and robed judges. It's the collective will of citizens who refuse to be silent." The crowd murmured agreement. Hope flickered in their eyes. Back in Washington, the Supreme Court conference room had become a scene of intense debate. Roberts circulated his draft referencing Marbury versus Madison, proposing to narrowly construe Jasmine's request as lacking standing. But several justices pushed back. Justice Elena Kagan worried that ignoring undeniable evidence would erode public faith in the court. Justice Jackson questioned whether semantics about standing should be weighed against a clearly documented abuse of power. The internal discord rippled beyond the marble walls, some of it leaking to news outlets, fueling speculation that a major schism was brewing at the court's highest levels. Jasmine, monitoring this from her Capitol office, sensed the tide shifting. She summoned her communications director, Leah, and said, "We need to be ready for any court move. If they dismiss us, we have to mobilize Congress immediately. If they take us, we have to shape the narrative so that when the ruling drops, the public feels empowered, not disillusioned. Clear the path." Leah nodded, jotting notes. "Schedule press briefings, prepare legislative language for oversight hearings, coordinate with the House Judiciary Committee." 2 nights later, Jasmine had trouble sleeping. She lay in bed, mind racing. She thought of her childhood home in Fort Worth, her mother waking her up at dawn so they could watch the sunrise together, the smell of bacon frying in the skillet, the way her mother would tell her stories about civil rights leaders who sacrificed everything. Jasmine felt that same sense of responsibility again, the weight of a legacy she couldn't bear to disappoint. She reached for her phone and sent a single text. "Keep pushing. The country's watching." At 8 a.m. sharp, the Supreme Court announced their decision date, 5 days from now. The announcement rippled through media outlets like a cannon shot. Weeks of speculation would culminate in one moment. Could they truly invalidate Jasmine's evidence, let it gather dust, and maintain legitimacy? On the other hand, ruling in favor of a congresswoman who had leaked classified material could set dangerous precedents. It was a lose-lose scenario for the institution, yet a watershed moment for democracy. Jasmine felt a knot tighten in her chest. She was about to see whether the ideals Americans cherished were stronger than political convenience. Over the next 48 hours, she moved like a whirlwind through the halls of Congress, holding impromptu meetings with Senate allies, briefing House minority leaders, and delivering an impassioned speech on the House floor that drew applause from both sides of the aisle. She employed every tool she possessed: factual precision, moral clarity, and an unshakable conviction in the righteousness of her cause. Every time she saw a rookie representative approach her in the hallway, she reminded them, "This isn't about me. This is about a system that's supposed to serve you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." On the night before the decision, she stayed late in her office, flipping through indices of Supreme Court opinions, searching for the perfect phrasing to counter any ruling they might issue. Malik sat with her until midnight. Jasmine tugged at a lock of her hair, eyes tired but determined. "Will this be remembered as the moment the Supreme Court upheld our democracy?" she asked quietly. Malik looked at her, honest admiration in his eyes. "It will, because you made them decide in public, on paper, in history books. No one can hush that." Jasmine nodded, feeling a surge of solidarity with every American who had ever watched the court's words shape their lives. Morning light spilled over the Capitol dome as Jasmine stepped out of her car, her face resolute. Reporters and cameras swarmed her path, shouting questions. Congresswoman Crockett, do you have any reaction to today's decision? She ignored them as she strode purposefully toward the court. Once inside, she joined a row of lawyers and advocates in the visitors' gallery, the marble corridors cool under her shoes. She could feel the hush in the chamber as she walked in, the knowledge that she was both hero and protagonist, the figure that every headline would feature. Justice Roberts sat in his black robe, adjusting his glasses, expression inscrutable. Jasmine breathed in, sharpened her focus, and watched as the Chief Justice rose to read the court's opinion. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. She felt every heartbeat, every breath. Then Roberts began. In the matter of Crockett versus United States of America, the court finds that the petitioner's claims do possess standing, as they implicate a significant threat to constitutional governance. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't dared hope for such clarity. Roberts continued, outlining how the executive surveillance program, as revealed by Jasmine's evidence, constituted an unconstitutional exercise of power. Every word he spoke felt like thunder, driving home a truth the nation needed to hear. When he concluded with a resounding declaration that the court would issue an injunction against the program pending congressional review, the chamber erupted. Some justices nodded solemnly. Others exchanged glances of relief. Roberts's face carried a rare, small smile, as though he understood deeply the gravity of what he had just sanctioned. Jasmine's chest heaved with relief, gratitude, and something deeper, vindication. She closed her eyes, recalling every late-night committee hearing, every smear from political adversaries, every snide remark about playing to the gallery. All of it had led to this. She allowed herself a moment to process before standing, as Roberts invited any counsel to speak. When her turn came, Jasmine rose, voice steady but brimming with emotion. Your Honors, I thank the court for recognizing the fundamental rights at stake. This decision affirms that no branch of government is above the law, and it sends a message to the American people that their voices, too, matter. She paused, letting that sink in. Then she turned toward Roberts' bench, and with a nod, acknowledged the Chief Justice's role in preserving constitutional balance. The chamber echoed with applause, a rare moment of bipartisan recognition in the highest court of the land. Outside, the world exploded. News tickers flashed across screens. Crockett v. USA, landmark victory, court checks executive overreach, and Chief Justice Roberts joins historic opinion a pending surveillance program. Social media buzzed with jubilation. Hashtags trended nationwide. Jasmine stepped out onto the steps, the sunlight painting her figure in golden hues, as supporters who had rallied overnight shouted, "Thank you, Jasmine." She raised a hand, tears welling in her eyes. She had won, for the principle of transparency, for every American whose privacy had been compromised, for every underrepresented community that rarely saw victory on such a monumental scale. But the fight was far from over. In the immediate aftermath, members of Congress scrambled to draft legislation to codify the decision, while the White House prepared an appeal, vowing to redefine the balance between national security and civil liberties. Meanwhile, conservative governors threatened to introduce state-level executive orders that could replicate the same tactics under different banners. Jasmine knew that her work had only just begun. She turned back toward the Capitol, determination blazing in her eyes. Could a single hearing change the course of history? In that echoing moment, it felt like it had. Days turned into weeks as Jasmine held marathon sessions with colleagues, drafting a comprehensive oversight bill that would require any intelligence program targeting citizens to receive congressional approval and independent judicial review. She spent long evenings in the statuary hall, voice hoarse from debates, shoulders rigid with fatigue, but spirit unbroken. The mid-story analysis that she had deliberately built into her strategy now became critically important. She paused at a hearing and addressed the assembled legislators directly. We must remember why we convened here. It's not for power, prestige, or statements. It's to safeguard the freedoms that define us. If we allow fear to propel us into tyranny, what have we truly defended? Her words resonated, reminding everyone of the bigger picture. Between these legislative battles, Jasmine also confronted personal challenges. Her marriage to Franklin Rhodes, the retired federal judge who had supported her from day one, came under strain. Late one night, she returned to their townhouse in Georgetown to find Franklin poring over appellate briefs, eyes red from sleepless nights. He looked up, exhaustion etched across his face. "You're fighting the good fight, but at what cost? You haven't slept properly in weeks, you've barely eaten a proper meal, and now Congress wants you to chair yet another subcommittee." The concern in his voice was unmistakable. Jasmine sank onto the sofa, body trembling. "I know, Frank. But if I don't do this, who will? If someone doesn't reshape these systems, our children will inherit a world where privacy is a relic, dissent is dangerous, and accountability is a myth." She paused, voice breaking. "I just need to know that you're with me, even when the world refuses to see me as anything other than trouble." He rose, crossed the room, and gently cupped her face. "I'm always with you. You fight for truth like nobody else I know. But promise me you'll find time to breathe, to live, to remember who you are when you're not battling the patriarchy." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. In that tender moment, she felt her purpose deepen. This wasn't just a political crusade. It was a fight for the soul of her marriage, her family, and her own self-worth. Weeks later came another pivotal moment. Late one evening, Jasmine sat alone on the steps of the Supreme Court, the building illuminated against the night sky. Newspapers were piled at her feet. Legislation stalled as partisan gridlock emerges. White House proposes narrower surveillance bill. Public opinion divides. She stared at the columns, unresolved, knowing that her victory at the court was only one battle in a far larger war. Could she navigate the complexities of partisan bickering, media sensationalism, and shifting public sentiment? She closed her eyes and recalled her election night in Dallas. The roars of her supporters, the pride in her family's eyes, the sense that change was possible. Another rhetorical question formed. If she faltered now, could she ever face those who had believed in her? She drew a deep breath, letting the cool night air steady her nerves. Then, with renewed resolve, she rose. The next morning, Jasmine convened a press conference on the Capitol lawn. An open-air platform buzzing with microphones, flags fluttering, and a crowd that had grown from dozens to hundreds in a matter of hours. She faced them, sunlight glinting off her glasses, and began. "Yesterday, some in Congress told me that sweeping reforms are impossible, that national security concerns will always override individual rights. I'm here to tell you that nothing is impossible when we stand together." Justice Roberts' opinion was monumental, but a court can only interpret the law. It cannot write it. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We will pass a bill that enshrines the right to privacy. We will demand transparency from our government. We will remind our fellow Americans that fear cannot be the engine of policy." The crowd erupted in cheers, banners waving, as Jasmine smiled, the sunlight painting her in gold. Yet the struggle continued. Conservative backlash intensified, and a coalition of senior senators threatened to filibuster any bill that even mentioned surveillance. Late into the night, Jasmine lobbied in Senator Schumer's office, books and legal briefs strewn across the desk, a half-empty coffee cup at her elbow. Schumer's eyes were weary. "Jazz, I get the moral imperative, I do. But politics is the art of the possible. If we push too hard, we lose moderate Republicans. If we water it down, we lose progressives. Where's the middle ground?" Jasmine's mind raced. She pictured the faces of every constituent who had shared stories of being targeted for their faith, their race, their peaceful protest. She knew compromise might betray some of her promises, but to win anything meant sacrifice. She closed her eyes, then looked Schumer in the eye. "We start strong. We set a ceiling, not a floor. This bill must reflect the highest standards of accountability. If senators from both sides balk, so be it. The American people will know who stood for their rights and who didn't." Papers rustled as Schumer nodded slowly, respect mixed with resignation in his gaze. By the time the bill reached the House floor, Jasmine had become a polarizing figure, hailed as a champion by civil rights leaders, vilified as a naive idealist by certain pundits, and admired grudgingly by colleagues who recognized her tenacity. In the days leading to the vote, she hosted invitation-only briefings, invited survivors of state surveillance to share their stories, and even leveraged social media influencers to amplify the message. Every speech she gave was strategic, every word measured for maximum impact. Perhaps most importantly, she remembered the human element, the tears in the eyes of a woman who had been wrongly detained at an airport, the voice cracking with gratitude from a man whose old journals had been seized by agents suspicious of his political beliefs. Jasmine harnessed these stories to shift public sentiment. Then came the vote. The chamber was packed. Cameras rolled as each representative stood, some lauding her courage, others cautioning against unintended consequences. Jasmine sat at the edge of her seat, hands clasped tightly. When the final tally registered 224 in favor and 211 against, she exhaled, barely believing it. It was a narrow margin, but for now, it was progress. She rose to address the chamber, her voice solemn. Today, we took a step toward restoring faith in our democracy. This bill is not perfect, but it establishes a clear principle. No one is above the Constitution. We have listened to the voices of our constituents, and we have acted. Now, it goes to the Senate. Our work continues. Applause thundered, mingled with jeers from the minority. Jasmine offered a small nod of gratitude, eyes glistening with tears of relief and determination. Midpoint analysis, woven into narrative flow. As Jasmine walked out of the Capitol that afternoon, the sun dipped low behind the Potomac, painting the water a restless silver. She paused at the top of the steps, leaning against the railing, letting the cool breeze carry away some of the tension. In her mind, she replayed every moment. The Supreme Court's monumental ruling, the televised coverage, the legislative wrangling in committee rooms, the outrage of the day sound bites. She asked herself, how did a single leak evolve into a nationwide movement? The truth was that Jasmine understood more keenly than most that institutions are only as strong as the trust people vest in them. Her leak had compelled the highest court to act, but it also revealed a glaring hypocrisy. A body sworn to uphold the Constitution had nearly ignored a blatant violation of it. She thought about Roberts, the Chief Justice she had shocked into action. In his draft opinion, he had recognized the danger of letting the executive operate in shadows, yet he also risked alienating half the country's political establishment. Jasmine reflected on the broader lesson. Legitimacy comes not from tradition or power, but from transparency and accountability. She remembered Justice Jackson's words during a private consultation. Democracy thrives on trust, and trust is the currency you earn when you reveal inconvenient truths. Jasmine felt the weight of that lesson pressing upon her. Yes, she had delivered a major victory, but the fragility of public trust meant that one misstep could unravel everything. She also weighed the moral dimensions. Was it right to leak classified information? Could she defend that choice if future leaks caused genuine harm? Was there a danger that future congressmen would cite her precedent to justify reckless disclosure? She knew some pundits were already raising those questions. But at that moment, she reaffirmed her conviction. When institutions fail, truth must prevail. It was a hard truth, but one that would guide her decisions going forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jasmine rose with renewed clarity, ready to face the next chapter of this saga. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The Senate debate was brutal. Senator Graham lambasted the bill as a gift to terrorists, while Senator Warren praised Jasmine's courage on the floor of the Commons. Late-night C-SPAN sessions flickered as Republicans filibustered, forcing hours of procedural votes. Each round tested Jasmine's resolve. Every time a new threat emerged, an amendment that would undermine civil liberties, a senator demanding stronger law enforcement powers, she countered with evidence, argument, and moral persuasion. When friends warned her to accept compromise, she replied, "I am not here to write half measures that treat liberty like a bargaining chip." Behind the scenes, she also faced personal strain. Franklin returned from a 5-day trip for speaking engagements to find Jasmine scarcely at home. He watched as she ate cold dinners at her desk, half listened to his concerns about a weekend getaway, then excused herself to prepare remarks for an overnight hearing. Late one Saturday, Franklin confronted her after midnight. "Jasmine, this job is consuming you. When was the last time we had dinner together that wasn't interrupted by a call from a reporter?" His voice trembled with worry. Jasmine's gaze softened, fatigued. She slid to the floor so they could speak eye to eye. "I know I'm risking us, Frank. But if we don't get this right now, we may never get another chance. You taught me that one person's action can rewrite history. I have to seize this moment." Franklin took her hand, tears glistening. "Just promise me you'll remember who you are beyond these walls. Promise me you'll live a life that isn't only about fight or text alerts or headlines." She nodded, knowing he was right, but also knowing that backing down wasn't an option. At the 11th hour, the Senate version of the bill had transformed into something neither perfect nor ideal. It included measures for harsher penalties for so-called rogue whistleblowers, expanded oversight committees, and allowed limited retention of metadata for counterterrorism purposes. Jasmine gritted her teeth, her heart sinking as she read the text. It was far from the bill she had envisioned. Crimes of conscience that had once seemed crystal clear now appeared muddied by horse trading and political expediency. She convened a final meeting with her legal advisors and said, "We can accept this as a bridge to something better, or we can let this imperfect compromise become law and ignore the moral cost. What do we do?" The room fell silent. Minutes later, Jasmine made her choice. She stood on the Senate floor the next morning, staring down at her colleagues. She had drafted a floor amendment to strip the most egregious provisions, knowing it would cost the bill critical votes. Yet she also knew that passing a fundamentally flawed bill would betray everything she had fought for. She said, voice ringing clear, "I will not let the fear of failure force me into passing something that violates the principle of liberty we stand to protect. We either pass a bill that truly safeguards privacy, or we pass nothing at all." A hush fell. The amendment failed in a narrow margin. The bill, now irreparably compromised, faced a final vote. At that moment, Jasmine faced her toughest decision. Vote yes to secure limited protections for millions, imperfect as they were, or vote no and risk losing everything. She closed her eyes, recalling the faces of grieving families whose conversations were taped, the detained grandmother who couldn't bury her brother, the small-town activists silenced for raising their voices. She remembered her mother's words, "Sometimes you trade one wound to avoid a deeper one." In that moment, she resolved to vote yes, but only with a solemn vow to return and refine the law as soon as possible. When she cast her vote, cameras captured every nuance, the trembling of her finger, the tight line of her lips, the tear that escaped her eye. The bill passed with Jasmine's vote. She addressed the chamber afterward, tears streaking her cheeks. "I regret that we could not achieve a perfect outcome, but I stand here knowing that this is a step forward. We must continue to fight for the ideals this country was founded on. No compromise on justice, but pragmatism on process. I will not relent until this bill meets the promise of liberty and dignity for all Americans." Applause echoed, some cheers, some standing ovations, some reserved nods. Jasmine bowed her head in gratitude, but inside, she resolved to never again settle for less than what the Constitution demanded. Late that evening, she returned home to Franklin, who greeted her with weary arms. They held each other in the quiet of their living room, the city lights of Georgetown twinkling through the window. "You did what you had to do," he whispered. Jasmine's shoulders slumped. "I compromised, but I won't accept half measures forever. We have the momentum now. We'll push again next session." Franklin kissed her forehead. "I know you will. But for tonight, rest." She closed her eyes, comforted by his presence. Over the next months, Jasmine's life unfolded in a relentless rhythm: constituent town halls, nightly strategy sessions, late-night interviews. She traveled across the country to speak at law schools, met with local NAACP chapters, and even moderated a televised debate between tech CEOs about data privacy. Everywhere she went, her story inspired others. In Philadelphia, a group of lawyers started drafting model legislation for states to follow. In Seattle, a grassroots coalition collected signatures for a ballot initiative requiring warrants for metadata collection. Jasmine served as a beacon, reminding people that change was possible. But the broader political climate was shifting. Halfway through the next year, midterm elections threatened to shift control of Congress. Republicans seized on Jasmine's compromises as weakness disguised as principle. They attacked her credibility, claiming she had sold out. Headlines blared, "Crockett's sellout, civil liberties versus national security." She learned to steel herself for every accusation, every mischaracterization, every rumor that threatened to erode her hard-earned stature. Yet in those moments of doubt, she found solace in three sources: the unwavering support of Franklin, the stories of everyday Americans whose lives had improved because of the law she championed, and the knowledge that sometimes the purest intentions required pragmatic sacrifice. Each morning, she read letters from constituents, handwritten notes recounting lost jobs due to overzealous surveillance, stories of families torn apart by suspicion. These letters were reminders that her fight was not about headlines, but about human lives. 6 months later, the midterm elections saw a narrow shift, but Jasmine's coalition held firm. Key senators who had opposed her bill lost their seats in surprising upsets, their campaigns marred by local scandals and public distrust. Jasmine returned to Washington to find several new allies in Congress, eager to collaborate on a new, stronger iteration of privacy legislation. She convened a meeting with the new chairs of the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees and laid out her vision. "We have to build a bipartisan framework, one that balances security with liberty. We will hold hearings where we invite whistleblowers under safe harbor provisions. We will require low-level data collection to be approved by special masters in each district. We will codify a sunset clause so that no program can continue unchecked forever." The room brimmed with cautious optimism. Some still doubted her, but most recognized her tenacious intellect and moral clarity. Within weeks, more than half the Senate co-sponsored the new bill. Yet the momentum was not unchallenged. In the summer heat of August, a terror attack in a small city revived calls for expanded surveillance. Families of the victims pleaded for stronger measures. Local mayors demanded immediate action, and a vocal minority accused Jasmine of tying our hands. Protesters gathered outside her D.C. office, holding signs that read, "Stop terror, not people," and "Hire Crockett, fire terrorists." One afternoon, Jasmine stood on the steps of the Cannon building as a woman screamed at her, "My brother died because of people like you. Do you want more dead bodies?" Jasmine's chest burned. She took a deep breath, walked down the steps, and approached the woman. Gently placing a hand on her shoulder, she said, "I am deeply sorry for your loss. I understand your pain, but I also believe that we cannot sacrifice our freedoms at the altar of fear. If we do, we become exactly what we're fighting." The woman stared at her, face contorted with grief and rage, then turned away, sobbing. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, tears forming. She had planted a seed. Love and reason, no matter how small, could break through anger. A few days later, she convened a hearing at the Capitol with victims' families and security experts. She allowed each victim's relative to speak, telling their story of loss. Then she presented experts who demonstrated how targeted enforcement, not mass surveillance, could prevent terror without undermining civil liberty. She pointed out that the original programs had proven ineffective. Millions of faces scanned, countless phone calls recorded, yet the major attacks still occurred. She built her argument meticulously, every word chosen to balance compassion with data. When she finished, there was a hushed silence, then applause from both sides. She had held space for grief and yet refused to concede principle. That night, as the sun set over the reflecting pool, Jasmine sat on a bench outside the Lincoln Memorial, absorbing the quiet. Tourists snapped photos, joggers zipped by, and the air carried the faint aroma of street vendors selling pretzels and souvenirs. She ran a hand through her hair, thinking of how far she had come. A congresswoman from Dallas, single mother, civil rights attorney, now the nation's leading voice on privacy. She thought of Roberts's oath to do impartial justice, now tied forever to her name. But she also remembered the magnitude of the work ahead, codifying new laws, ensuring proper oversight, confronting every hot-headed call for unchecked power. She wondered if she had inspired change or simply sparked another cycle of debate. She closed her eyes and whispered, "We'll see." Over the next year, the revised bill made its way through committees with surprising speed. Jasmine's deft coalition building, her willingness to host listening sessions across the country, and her transparent process won reluctant support. She consciously included Native American tribal leaders, tech company CEOs, civil liberties organizations, and law enforcement representatives. Every stakeholder felt heard, or at least recognized. The final draft included a novel provision. A Supreme Court appointed privacy ombudsperson to review any national security program, ensuring that constitutional rights were never cast aside. When the final vote occurred, the score was 67-32, a bipartisan victory that eclipsed most legislative achievements in recent memory. Jasmine stood on the Senate steps as the president signed the bill into law, tears streaming down her cheeks. Cameras rolled, and reporters called her a hero of democracy. Yet she refused to revel in the spotlight too long. She turned to Franklin, waiting in the crowd, and whispered, "This is just chapter 1." And indeed, a new chapter dawned immediately. Several months later, Jasmine learned of another administration's proposal, increasing data sharing agreements with foreign governments, potentially circumventing domestic protections. She watched in horror as the National Security Council drafted language that blurred lines between foreign intelligence and domestic surveillance. Memories of the first leak flooded back, the taste of fear and exhilaration when she revealed the truth in the Supreme Court. She knew the cycle would continue. Every administration seeking to expand power, every congressperson tempted to look the other way. She felt the weight of her duty again, never to let a foot off the pedal for even a second. But she also understood that victory at the Supreme Court and passage of a bill was not enough. She needed to change the cultural mindset that equated security with secrecy. She embarked on a nationwide tour, town halls, televised debates, pop-up listening sessions in small-town diners, to keep the conversation alive. She carried with her a reminder she had pinned inside her office. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. In one such town hall in Des Moines, Iowa, she engaged directly with farmers worried about farm data being shared with government agencies suspicious of their political leanings. In a community center packed with steelworkers in Pittsburgh, she listened to retired factory workers who feared their union activities had been monitored. In every encounter, Jasmine emphasized the essential message: privacy and security are not enemies. They can and must coexist. She asked every group, "What does dignity mean to you? How do we ensure no one's kneecaps get crammed when they ask a simple question?" Her rhetorical questions did more than elicit responses. They provoked introspection. Back in Washington, Roberts watched quietly from his chambers, reading transcripts of Jasmine's speeches. He recalled the day he first heard her argument, how her courage and clarity had pierced the court's deliberations. He recognized that her fight was not a passing tempest. It was a movement that could realign the judiciary's role in society. As he reviewed new filings challenging aspects of the law, he drafted an internal memo urging justices to remain vigilant. He had learned from her, the law is living, breathing, and always in flux. The final guard against tyranny wasn't the court alone. It was the active participation of citizens like Jasmine Crockett. A year later, a second bout of congressional hearings was called to address the foreign data sharing proposal. Jasmine testified again before a packed Judiciary Committee, her voice unwavering as she outlined how foreign partnerships could be exploited to reroute data back into domestic channels, subverting every safeguard they had spent years building. She cited examples from allied nations where similar programs had been abused, journalists imprisoned, activists monitored, political opponents silenced. Her testimony was scathing, unflinching, and backed by data. When she concluded, Justice Roberts himself emerged from the audience, an unprecedented move, and stood to offer support. He commended her diligence, then issued a statement reminding lawmakers that the Constitution transcends partisan expediency. His endorsement, unspoken but unmistakable, electrified the hearing. But then an unexpected twist emerged. One of Jasmine's closest allies, a senator she had mentored, was implicated in a corruption scandal, accused of taking contributions from tech giants in exchange for favorable language in the privacy bill. The news hit Jasmine like a freight train. She felt betrayal cut deep, doubting everything she had built. She and the senator, once allies, exchanged heated words in a secure hallway. His apologies mingled with his insistence that she had known nothing. Jasmine's voice quavered as she said, "I believed in you. I believed in us. If you're guilty, that could unravel everything." The senator's gaze flickered with shame, but he did not deny the evidence. Jasmine's chest tightened with anger and sorrow. Could she salvage the bill's integrity? Would the public trust her after this betrayal? She retreated to her office, the city lights of D.C. stretching out below, looking almost indifferent to her pain. She sat at her desk, eyes closed, memories of the first leak washing over her. She thought of her mother's words about accountability and sacrifice. She thought of Franklin's steady presence. She realized that integrity was more than legislation. It was daily choices, even when it hurt. She called a press conference and said, voice cracking, "I am deeply disappointed by the actions of someone I considered a friend and ally. But I refuse to let this betrayal derail our progress. We will strengthen the bill's ethics provisions, increase transparency measures, and ensure no backroom deals undermine our commitment to the American people." That night, as cameras captured her solemn resolve, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had been tested by corruption, but she refused to yield. In the months that followed, she led an ethics reform task force, drafting amendments that would tighten reporting requirements, close loopholes, and impose stricter penalties for bribery. She built a coalition of reform-minded legislators across the spectrum, leveraging public outrage to force swift action. Even some of her harshest critics conceded that her moral clarity and willingness to hold even allies accountable set a new standard. When the updated privacy and ethics package passed, overwhelmingly, it became a hallmark of bipartisan cooperation. But fame and scrutiny came at a personal price. Late one evening, Jasmine found an envelope on her doorstep, anonymous, unmarked. Inside was a photograph of her daughter's school, taken from a distance, and a typed note. "Stay out of certain matters, or next time it's your family we target." Panic seized her. She raced to her daughter's room, brushing her hair at the pink desk cluttered with markers and books. Her daughter looked up, alarm reflected in her eyes. Jasmine's voice shook as she whispered, "Mommy's okay, baby. It's just someone trying to scare me." She held her daughter tight, her own tears flowing. This was a new form of danger, attacks not on her principles, but on her family. She called Franklin, his voice raw with concern. "We need to tighten security. Move into the safe room for a while. I can't let them intimidate us." Franklin's reassurance was calm. "We'll protect her. We'll find out who did this." Yet Jasmine felt the familiar tremor of fear. She realized again the price of leadership, not just policy battles, but threats to every person she loved. She steeled herself. If she retreated, darkness would win. With Franklin's help, she commissioned a discreet investigation. She also held a private meeting with FBI leadership, sharing the note and asking for guidance. They offered a protective detail and assured confidentiality. Jasmine nodded, gratitude mingling with anger. She refused to be cowed. She pressed on, even as darkness lurked at her back. At a weekend retreat in Vermont, she reflected on the path that had brought her here, from Dallas's east side to the halls of Congress and finally to this pinnacle of national influence. The snow-capped mountains outside seemed to mute the noise of the world. She met with a small group of community organizers, their conversation warm, intimate. reminding her why she had begun this journey: to lift the voiceless, to challenge injustice, to prove that one person's courage could indeed alter the course of history. She felt a spark. Despite threats, despite betrayal, despite exhaustion, her resolve had never been stronger. Returning to D.C. at dawn, Jasmine prepared for the next session of hearings. She knew the foreign data sharing proposal would face fierce resistance, especially from senators who had already pushed back on her privacy bill. She spent hours poring over classified briefings, consulting constitutional scholars, and listening to whistleblowers who described early warning signs of digital overreach. Each conversation sharpened her understanding. Technology advanced faster than law. Commerce valued data over dignity. Governments saw surveillance as the first line of defense, not the last. She realized her next challenge was not just to rewrite laws, but to change culture. On the day of the hearing, the packed committee room buzzed with anticipation. Jasmine took her seat at the witness table, calm but focused. She placed her notes in front of her and looked up at the senators. "Thank you for this opportunity. Today, I will show you why foreign-born data must not circumvent our domestic privacy protections," she began. She proceeded to deliver one of her most powerful arguments yet, integrating personal stories from immigrants whose communications had been shared across borders, combined with statistical analyses showing how such data sharing had led to wrongful detentions abroad. She anticipated every question: the trade-off between intelligence sharing and civil liberties, the security assumptions that underpinned policymakers' views, and the technological loopholes that could be exploited. When she concluded, birds perched on the terrace behind the dais chirped as though in salute. Senators exchanged silent glances, whispers spreading. A week later, the committee released a bipartisan report effectively blocking the worst elements of the proposal, endorsing Jasmine's recommended oversight mechanisms. Chief Justice Roberts, having followed the developments closely, arranged a private meeting with her in his chambers, a rare gesture. She entered the wood-paneled room and found him seated, robe laid aside, a cup of tea in hand. He gestured for her to sit. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, "I want to commend you. Your tireless work has not only reshaped policy, but also reminded the judiciary of our fundamental duty: to the people, not to power." Jasmine felt a swell of gratitude and respect. She held his gaze and responded, "Thank you, Chief Justice. Your willingness to stand with principle gives me hope for our institutions." He nodded, as if attuned to every unspoken nuance. Two branches of government, each reliant on the other to uphold the Constitution. Returning to her office that afternoon, Jasmine found a stack of condolence letters from around the world: students from Europe, activists from Asia, academics from Africa, thanking her for spearheading a movement that transcended national borders. She sat at her desk, the sun streaming in, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of every father who had taught her to stand up for what was right, every teacher who had encouraged her to ask questions, every coach who had pushed her to be resilient. She realized her journey had become emblematic of a larger truth. Power had to be challenged, and justice demanded vigilance. As the months turned into years, Jasmine Crockett's name became synonymous with civil liberties. She authored books, delivered commencement addresses, and continued to mentor a new generation of leaders. The privacy law she championed became a model for other democracies, sparking global movements. Even Casey, a young activist from Chicago she had once met at a town hall, now served in the Illinois legislature, drafting state-level reforms inspired by Jasmine's work. Yet every dawn reminded her that the struggle was never truly over. New technologies beckoned: AI-driven surveillance drones, biometric databases, predictive policing algorithms that threatened to stretch beyond constitutional boundaries. She convened a global summit in Geneva, inviting legal scholars, tech CEOs, and civil society groups to draft a universal declaration on digital rights. She said in her opening address, "In the digital age, our data is our identity. If we allow that identity to be commodified or weaponized, we lose what it means to be free." The summit laid the groundwork for an international framework that was praised as a 21st-century Magna Carta. Throughout all this, John Roberts remained a constant, silent presence, often citing Jasmine's work in his opinions, sometimes seeking her counsel, but always acknowledging her role in revitalizing public faith in the court's mission. Their professional relationship evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect, an unexpected alliance between a congresswoman and a chief justice, united by a shared belief that the law should protect the vulnerable, not enable the powerful. One crisp autumn evening, Jasmine returned to Dallas for a homecoming fundraiser, touted as a victory lap, but for her, a moment to reconnect with the community that had propelled her. She walked into the gymnasium of her old high school, now packed with former teachers, neighbors, and classmates. They greeted her like family. She took the microphone, the band stopped playing, and she said, voice steady but warm, "When I started out, I never imagined that I would stand before the Supreme Court or lead global initiatives. I only knew that when I heard the stories of injustice, I couldn't turn away. Every step I took because I believed in a vision of America where freedom and dignity were not just slogans, but lived realities." She paused, scanning faces streaked with tears. "Thank you for giving me the courage to believe that one person can spark change. But the truth is, every one of you has the power to shape the future. All you have to do is stand and say, 'Not on my watch.'" The gymnasium erupted in applause, a cathartic release of pride and hope. Back in Washington, Jasmine found a quiet moment one Saturday at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, repurposed for a community outreach event. Children's laughter echoed as she led a group of interns on a tour of the press box. She watched them scribble in their notebooks, eyes alight with possibility. A young intern, shy but determined, asked her, "Congresswoman Crockett, what kept you going when the threats got personal, and when so many people told you to slow down or play it safe?" Jasmine paused, kneeling to meet the intern's gaze. She felt the weight of that question, because the truth was that her resilience came from every community she had fought for, every person who believed her voice mattered. She smiled, placing a hand on the intern's shoulder. "I never saw it as a choice between safety and righteousness. I saw it as a choice between silence and speaking out. And I will always choose to speak out." That night, alone in her study, Jasmine looked at a framed photo, her mother and father on her wedding day, smiles bright, youth untainted by the battles to come. Beside it stood a gavel gifted by Roberts, a symbol of their shared victory. Tears welled in her eyes as she considered the path she had walked, each victory hard-won, each setback a lesson. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, "No, we won't stop. Not now, not ever." Years later, with her daughter at college studying political science, Jasmine Crockett continued to influence policy, penning op-eds, testifying before legislative bodies, mentoring young leaders. Her journey remained a testament to the enduring power of one person's conviction to move mountains. Every speech, every hearing, every conversation was another thread in the tapestry of a nation constantly renewing itself. And though the names of chief justices and presidents would change, her message endured. When institutions falter, citizens must rise. When privacy is at risk, rights demand defenders. And when justice is threatened, courage will pave the way for tomorrow. If you want more jaw-dropping political dramas starring Jasmine Crockett, hit subscribe now.